peninsulas.
Mr. Speaker, there's an age-old question in business classes. How much does a bottle of water cost? In a grocery store, it's about 25 cents. At a restaurant, it's about $2.50. In an airport, it's $5. And if you were at a salmon festival in Newfoundland where it was 30 degrees and they ran out of water, you were paying $10 for a bottle of water passed through the fence. And if you're in the desert, in the heat, 3 days without water, I'd say you'd give your left kidney for a bottle of water. The point is this, Mr. Speaker, the more scarce something is, the more valuable it is. And the reverse of that is true. The more abundant something is, the less valuable it is. It would be nearly impossible to sell a bottle of water next to a cold spring. The bottle of water is effectively worthless. We don't really buy and sell things in this country. We trade. Those are arbitrary terms for trade. We trade products for currency. We trade one bottle of water for $1. We trade a vehicle for thousands of dollars. It's like the famous game of Catan, where players have to trade resources to complete tasks. If there's a lot of wheat, players may pay 4 wheat cards to get 1 brick. But if the game was reversed, they may use 4 brick cards to get 1 wheat. It's supply and demand. It's economics 101. So what happens when our dollar, our currency, loses its scarcity? It loses value. If we simplify our economy down to 5 loaves and $5, every loaf is worth $1. But if we have 5 loaves and $500, every loaf is now worth the high price of $100. But is the bread really worth more? It's the same loaf. It tastes the same. It's just that the currency is worth less. The baker can't take his $100 and buy a new pair of shoes. Because of this hypothetical inflation, that new $100 can probably only buy a dozen eggs. A dozen eggs is still only worth 1 loaf of bread. And you might say, eggs will never go that high. Well, let me tell you this. In 1925, a dozen of eggs was just 47 cents. Now, they're $4.70. That's a 100% increase. This egg is still the same. Same size, same taste, same egg. In fact, if the dollar never lost its value over time, the egg should actually be cheaper because the farming industry has become more efficient and able to produce more eggs with less resources. So why did some eggs increase from 47 cents to $4.70? It's because our dollar is worth less. In 1925, $1 could get you 2 dozen eggs. Now $1 can only get you about 3 eggs. So why is the value of our currency drop? It's from overspending. The government doesn't have money. They spend money collected from taxes. But once they spend what they've collected, they borrow or print the money. And this is where the problem comes. Throughout most of her history, currency was actually gold and silver. Gold and silver coins. They were hard to mobilize and easy for others to steal. So banks said, well, you give us the money, we'll secure it, and we'll give you a banknote that you can use for trading products in lieu. This was called the gold-backed currency, or as we call it, the gold standard. And that system worked until banks and governments realized that they could loan more money and even print money if they removed the gold standard. So now our money is backed by a promise, a simple promise, a promise we make as Canadians to each other, a promise that will accept a piece of paper as a trading token. The only problem we have is that this trading token, the value of that can simply be changed by increasing the amount in circulation. So what's the harm of printing money and causing inflation? Well, if you're a business person, perhaps an executive with Brookfield Asset Management, or a trust fund baby like Justin Trudeau, inflation means no more to you than water on a duck's back. They don't have fixed salaries. They have business incomes, and they're protected by their assets. If you're an average Joe and you get a 1% raise at work, we're excited. But if inflation was 3%, that means that the values of our wage went down by 3%, so we just got robbed. We actually got a 2% pay cut. But if you own your company and you have 3% inflation, you can simply put your prices up to match inflation and you haven't lost a cent. In fact, You get to get on the news and convince the average Joe that you should invest in their companies because they've had record-breaking profits. And we see this in the grocery stores. The inflation is actually good for rich people in this country that are backed by assets. And the average Joe, we put our money in a savings account. We get excited when we make 2% interest on our savings. But if inflation is 3%, we actually lost 1%. Whereas the rich, they keep their savings not in a bank account, but in assets. So when inflation raises by 3%, it's no big deal. Their real estate portfolio just increased as well. I've heard our conservative leaders say over and over again, inflation is the cruelest form of taxation. It taxes the poor without them even knowing it. Nobody comes into this House, puts forth a bill, or votes on it. They simply go to their boardrooms and make quiet decisions to make your money worth less. And it's a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face when governments get up and say that they're giving a 1% tax cut to 22 million Canadians, while Canadians are losing 1.7% in inflation. They just taxed us an extra 0.7% without us even knowing it. So if you're going to make $60,000 in a year, you just lost 0.7% or $420 in hidden inflationary taxes. And you just lost 1.7% on all your savings. And that, my friends, is exactly why the cost of living is going up and we can't afford the same things anymore. These Liberals have been borrowing and printing money, circulating billions more. And we've seen this a lot in the past 10 years. Since 2019 alone, the Canadian dollar has lost 16% of its value. Did us Canadians at home get a 16% wage increase? Not likely, not many of us. Surprisingly, housing costs haven't gone up in Canada when compared to the price of gold. The average price of home today is the same as in the early 1980s. If we had used a gold-backed currency that couldn't be devalued by money printing, houses would still be the same price today. That's why Conservative Party doesn't believe in budgets that balance themselves, and that we believe in fiscal responsibility. We need budgets that aren't filled with generational debt and inflation. And I'm not looking to hold these Liberals to conservative promises. I want to hold them accountable to liberal promises. These Liberals ran a campaign on bringing in a fancy banker who's going to bring fiscal responsibility to the nation and save us by only having a $62 billion deficit. But here we are at a $78 billion deficit. The entire country's deficit right now is at $1.3 trillion. We spend more money in interest servicing this debt than what we pay out to all the provinces right across this country in healthcare payments. We spend more money servicing this debt right across this country than what we do in GST revenues. So every time we go to the store and we pay GST on something, that's just covering the cost of the interest on this $1.3 trillion debt. So where do the Liberals decide to cut? They decided to cut $4 billion in the next few years to Veterans Affairs, the department that supports the people that fought for this country. The reason we have our freedoms, veterans and Veterans Affairs. How disappointing and how disgraceful. Even with those disgraceful cuts, the Liberals plan on adding another $300 billion in the next 5 years, totaling $1.6 trillion. I travel across my district and the wharves are deplorable. In fact, wharves right across Newfoundland and Labrador are deplorable. The Conservatives promised to double infrastructure spending for small craft harbours. But the Liberals decided they had to outdo us, so they promised to triple it. But this budget comes nowhere close to doing that. Then they promised national building projects right across this country. Almost every province got one, except for Newfoundland and Labrador. There was only one in Atlantic Canada. And in fact, it was to Nova Scotia for building wind turbines. Nothing for PEI, nothing for New Brunswick, nothing for my home province of Newfoundland and Labrador. We have massive opportunities in gold and critical minerals in mining, critical minerals that we need for this Canadian sovereignty. We have massive oil and gas resources, massive potential in hydroelectricity, and we have multi-billion-dollar fabrication sites sitting idle. Yet not one project announced, not one. I cannot support this Liberal budget because this Liberal budget does not support Newfoundland and Labrador. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I commend my colleague on his speech. he spoke at length about inflation. One of the causes of inflation is the high cost of energy. And the costs of energy is not high because of the carbon pricing, but rather because of the huge profit margins in the oil and gas sector. In fact, there was 1 year recently in which the profits were $131 billion per year. In the United States, it's $80 billion. $80 billion in dividends. That's $10 billion a year that leaves Canada and goes directly to the States as dividends. So when my colleague hears about that, about what's happening in big oil, does he not feel that that's shameful for Canada rather than something to be proud of?
Mr. Speaker, my colleague from Quebec raises some good points. And I think Newfoundland and Labrador is doing the right thing. We have Newfoundland Hydro has a subsidy called Newfoundland Oil Co. And they actually have equity. Sometimes, up to 8-10% equity in our offshore oil and gas industry so that we can make sure that Newfoundlanders and Canadians are getting a good cut and a good fair percentage of that. It keeps our Newfoundlanders at work. It keeps our Canadians at work. We make billions of dollars off oil and gas in our province. 25% of Newfoundland's GDP comes from oil and gas. So when Conservatives promised to double oil and gas production in Newfoundland and Labrador, that would have added an extra 25% to our economy. So thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate it.
And I'd like to thank my colleague, a fellow engineer, for a great speech. Mr. Speaker, I heard him talk about, all of the money that should have been spent in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I do agree. I'd like him to comment on the amount of money that this Prime Minister is giving to other countries instead of putting Canadians first.
Mr. Speaker, I would actually love for the Liberals to actually give us how much, the actual number of how much money is actually fleeing other countries. I seen a video this morning on Instagram talking about how our Prime Minister was in another country saying that there was going to be trillions of dollars going to Europe. Trillions. That just blows my mind. And then we see that trillions going to Donald Trump in the United States. I don't understand why we're not putting that money in Canada, putting Canada first, and actually building Canada strong.
I realize this member's new, so he probably is unaware of the fact that it was Stephen Harper that had massive cuts to veteran services, including 9 offices. Also, he's probably not, he wasn't here when the leader of the opposition went on and on about removing the carbon tax would fix all of the inflationary problems, neglecting the fact that they are totally driven by global forces.
I tell you, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell the country what wasn't happening when Stephen Harper was in government. Veterans weren't calling Veterans Affairs, begging for assistance, and being asked, would you rather die with our MAID program? That was not happening under Stephen Harper government. That's not going to happen under a Conservative government. Thank you very much.